All right. And with that, good day, good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are. That's how it goes. Um, yeah. Last day of the Golgari prep for the main video. Tomorrow, I think we'll get started with the next color combination, which I did not have a look at yet. I'll have to make the thumbnail later. But we're gonna start off with the Gitruk monster today. I have something slightly different in terms of like overlay and a bit of like shenanigans we can do on the side. So let's get this started. Top left, you'll always see the commander that we're gonna talk about. I figured that might be useful for people dropping in, especially while we're in the Moxfield search. And then I have like a time counter for how long we've spent per commander. That is mostly for me and out of curiosity, and I think it's a cute gimmick. But also you'll get to see like what is to come. Also for people who are just dropping in, like have an overview of which commander we're still gonna talk about. And then yeah, top left chat in case somebody wants to chat. But for now we're gonna get started with the Gitruk monster. Let's see if I can sync up the images and the live split. All right, Gitruk monster, we're kicking it off. The Gitruk monster, Ravenous Ride. So not the classic Gitruk monster. I think I excluded that because everybody knows it already. This one is also a 5-drop, 5 mana, 6/5, a frog horror, and most importantly, a mount. It has trample and haste, and whenever the Gitruk Ravenous Ride deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that saddled it this turn. If you do, draw X cards, and then put up to X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. And then it has Saddle 1. Saddle is pretty much like crewing a vehicle. You have to have a creature with at least power 1 or more. You tap it, and then the Gitruk monster is saddled. Excuse me. The big difference, of course, between crew and saddle is that the Gitruk monster is... Oh, I keep saying Gitruk monster, but the Gitruk is always a creature, so you can always attack just with a 6/5 trample haste commander. But if you saddle it, you get this nice bonus effect. Let's dissect. 5 mana means you probably want to ramp either on 2 and 4, or you want a very tightly packed curve. The way I would approach this if I was like hyper focused on getting a bracket 3 deck would be lots of 1 mana ramp, lots of 3 mana ramp, and then you play Gitruk on turn 3 if possible. That might be too strong for bracket 2, but who knows. Then it has Trample and Haste, which means it already has a lot of the tools you need to get this effect going. As a matter of fact, like you do need to deal damage to a player, but if you get Gitruk monster down on turn either 3 or 4, which should be your absolute goal as a green deck, then there will be someone open to a 6/5. That means we also need creatures to saddle. When I look at something that puts land cards from your hand onto the battlefield, I think of my ramp package as something that cannot consist of too many creatures that tap for mana. We are looking at a lot of Nature's Lore and 3-visit type cards. You will be playing more lands than the average green deck. A lot of green decks can get away with playing a lot of signets and stuff. I don't think you want signets. I believe you want your entire ramp package be Gitruk fodder or Gitruk Chaos. Oops, somebody forgot to add a bunch of stuff. Where's my untagged sorceries? Oh, sorry, of course. 3 visits we talked about in the video, so it's up here. What tag did I give the Gitrog monster? Probably TGR, exactly. Okay, so let's give this the tag. Hashtag TGR, the Gitrog monster. And then also Nature's Lure also gets the TGR. What else do we want? We want the classic, probably also already in this list, Sakura Tribe Elder. Yes, you also get the TGR tag. I think you need to make a conscious decision on whether you want to go 1-3-5, which is admittedly a bit harder in Commander. You need the Utopia Sprawls and then all the 1-mana dorks. Or if you want to take a more chill approach, which would be lots of 2s and then some 4s. So you can ideally go on turn 2, you play one of these. And then later on, you sack them. Next turn, you have 4 mana. You play 2 of these, go up to 6. And then, you have potentially ramped 3 times the turn you play Gitrog monsters. So that would be pretty good. But you can, you can make a conscious decision. A little bit jumbled, but let's try and focus here. We want all the 1-mana dorks. Find, Horn, honestly, probably also in here already. So let's get these as representatives of the 1-3 plan. Lots of ones. Llanowar. Elves also. Llanowar. I'm going to use this in the video as these 2 as representatives of all the 1-mana dorks. What's nice about these, and there is some differences to like a Noble or Ignoble Hierarch or a Birds of Paradise, is these can also crew the Gitrog and then later on turn into card draw, which is very nice. 3 mana, honestly, I'm not that familiar with 3 mana ramp. But it should be creature based. So let's look for creature. Color identity, let's say green, mana value 3, and Oracle text is add. And see what we find. I know there's a bunch of stuff. I just need to find some representatives. It would be ideal if they did something when they die, but they don't need to. Okay, let's say, for example, Circle of Dreams Druid. Very good. It taps for mana, and in a pinch, you can also sacrifice it to the Gitrog monster. Perfect, though, I believe, is stuff like Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and maybe we should take that into consideration with our 1-drops as well. Is we want the Sylvan Ranger type ramp that puts a land or a Boreal Grazer. We want to put those into our deck because they can put lands from our graveyard, from our hand into the battlefield. So let's look for put land battlefield. Green mana value 1. I believe it's Sylvan Ranger and a Boreal Grazer. Oh. Elvish Pioneer is only basic land, but I know Krosan Wayfarer. That's the card I was looking for. I'm going to use these as an example. Let's go down. So, and all of these have very, like, these are all different approaches, I believe, to the same commander. And all of them have their ups and downs. Up and down sides. Let's talk about them more specifically. So, stuff like a Boreal Grazer just puts a land from your hand onto the battlefield. This is very good because you want to be playing a bunch of lands, right? What's bad about it is that it can't crew or mount the Gitrog. Elvish Pioneer is very good. It's a 1-mana 1/1. It puts a land from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped, but it needs to be a basic land, so that's the downside. Upside, it can crew. I'm gonna say crew because I will not remember mount. And it can crew the Gitrog. Findhorn, also 1-mana 1/1, but it taps to add a mana, which goes against the plan of putting lands from your hand onto the battlefield. It's not a biggie. I would still play it, especially because, well, you can only have so many lands in your starting hand, right? Krosan Wayfarer can put any land from your hand into play, but you need to sacrifice it, which means it can't ramp and crew the Gitrog. It's still worth including, I believe, especially if you go for the 1/3 approach. Yeah, actually, let's get all the 2-mana cards out of here because they've gotten mentions otherwhere in the video. They will have gotten, I guess. And let's talk about the 1/3 plan. And then on 3, again, we have the split of Dryad of the Elysian Grove, ramps for every land, or ramps the more lands you have in your deck. If you run out of lands, suddenly this is not ramp anymore. It's also a bit of mana fixing, but I mean, that's negligible in my opinion. And then Circle of Dreams Druid is more powerful if you already have a 1-drop, because then it taps for 2 mana. But it might be that you have a bunch of lands stuck in your hand. Next, Gwenna Eyes of Gaia only ramps for creature spells or activated abilities of creatures. But when you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, which our commander is, put a +1/+1 counter on Gwenna Eyes of Gaia and untap it. So theoretically, you cast Gitrog, this untaps with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you maybe play even 2 more 1-drops. So this is kind of an auto-include in my opinion if you go the 1/3 route with a 5-mana commander that has power 5 or more. Then we can look for some very powerful landfall payoffs. Because, of course, if we play Gitrog, put a bunch of lands into the battlefield, then might as well look for the best payoffs. I really like Bristly Bill Spinesower. It taps to crew the Gitrog. It puts +1/+1 counters on creatures, so it can make the Gitrog monster hit harder, or it can make some of the fodder larger that you then sacrifice. It's super expensive, but in general, I am very proxy friendly. That means, yeah, I'm still gonna talk about it, even though it's $30, and I think nobody should buy this card until it rotates out of standard. Although I'm not even sure if standard is like the driving force of this price tag. It's a 2-drop, which you might think is awkward, but I don't think it is. The turn after, you kind of have to see where you are, and the card standalone is so good that it might be worth kind of sabotaging your own mana curve. Whenever a land enters, put a +1/+1 counter on its creature. Green, discard a creature card, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This would be better with the other Gitrog, I believe. It's still a pretty good card. Let's see if we can find one more. Of course, we don't need infinite amounts of landfall payoffs. So Mossborn Hydra is pretty good because it becomes very large. It has trample. You either use it to attack alongside the Gitrog, or you sacrifice it to the Gitrog to draw 1,000,000 cards, which could be very nice. That means, let's go back. We have our landfall payoffs for the video. And always remember that Mossborn Hydra. What I'm trying to do is engage the viewer and make them think on their own. I'm not here to like give them the solution to their deck. or, you know, what could be considered a solution to the deck. What else? So, saddle also means that a creature becomes tapped. That is something that have been on the lookout more and more. There is creatures that just want to be tapped. Recently in Lorwyn, we got merfolk that specifically care about this. Unfortunately, the Lorwyn merfolk are white and blue. That means not in our color pair. But let's see. Becomes tapped. Let's try and find some good payouts for this. I know in red there's a card, Magda, that cares about dwarves being tapped. I know a card in white. Let's see if we can find more. So here we have a 2-drop that ramps, so it's not terrible. It's not perfect for our curve specifically, but when it becomes tapped, we get to exile target card from a graveyard. Not good enough, but this is the kind of profile we're looking for. Dermotaxi. I know this is also kind of graveyard hate, right? So as it enters, 2 mana as it enters, exile a creature card from a graveyard. Tap 2 untapped creatures you control. It becomes a copy of the exile card. Not what we're looking for. Elves you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped during your turn, untap it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Honestly, maybe not perfect, but this is a very good exemplary card. You tap your elf either for mana or to crew the Gitrog, and then they untap and even get a +1/+1 counter. Of course, untapping is nice and all. +1/+1 counter is nice and all, but we mostly care about the untapping. So maybe we find one more to put them side by side on the screen in the final video. But we don't have to. That is a very good card. Okay. Whenever King Makar becomes untapped, you may exile target creature. If you do, put a colorless artifact token named Gold onto the battlefield. It has sacrificed this artifact. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I think I'm gonna choose this. Reason being, yes, it doesn't care about being tapped, but instead untapped. But it's a very typical example of a card that is clearly designed about other ways than attacking of getting a creature tapped. It's a 4 mana 2/3. Who are you realistically going to attack and then untap the next turn, right? Everybody's going to kill this on sight with a blocker if you try to attack. If you just crew, it becomes tapped and nobody gets a chance to block it. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, there's smaller stuff like Night Market Lookout. When it becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. That we've previously mentioned on a different commander, so also very possible to include that. But for now, I'm happy. Was it called King? Let's see. Yes. King Makar, you get the tag, and Dionys, Elfish Archdruid, also gets the tag. We could also simply look for some crew or saddle strategies or saddle payoffs. Because I know in that set that the Gitrog was, of course, first printed, there was a bunch of saddle stuff. And yeah, that's always a good strategy. Like, if there's a new set and things get printed for the first time, there's going to be a bunch of support. For example, Caustic Bronco. I remember this one. I think it's in Vintage Cube, so it can't be that bad, right? 2 mana 2/2, a Snake Horse Mount. Whenever it attacks, reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. You lose life equal to that card's mana value if Caustic Bronco isn't saddled. So if you don't saddle it, it's like a bob. So what's his actual name? I can see the card, but you probably know which card I'm talking about. 2-drop that has exactly this effect. Otherwise, though, so if you do saddle it, each opponent loses that much life. Could be nice as just an extra thing you can saddle. It is just a 2-drop. That is a 2-2, so it's difficult to attack and have it survive. But this is Commander, so you could always ask someone if they were willing to take 2 for your benefit. Apart from that, Tumblewag. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Whenever this attacks while saddled, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. Interesting, especially because it falls into the 3 slot, but usually you'd be wanting to ramp on 3. Let's take it with us for now. And we're gonna say we're happy with that as some saddle payoffs. And then I really need to clean this up real quick. And maybe we can talk about the commander that these belong to, because that's certainly very interesting. This is like a reanimate. What did we talk about? It's been a week. I believe this was... It's not Dina, it's Savra maybe? Whenever you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life. Yes, this is all definitely Savra. The idea was you have a planeswalker that cares about black and green creatures going or being sacrificed on your side of the field. So we were thinking black makes opponents sacrifice a creature. That's very strong. Green gains you 2 life, so black is obviously stronger. One of the coolest cards as a payoff we found was Blood Funnel. Non-creature spells you play cost 2 less to play, but whenever you play a non-creature spell, counter that spell unless you sacrifice a creature. It's like a very good payoff for for exactly that. And I believe all of these belong to Savra as like a thing that casts a bunch of stuff. This was probably us talking about Skullbriar, a creature that becomes larger and larger. And even if it changes zones, the counters stay on it. So Season of Gathering is a card that... Oh yeah, and all of these cheap reanimates, also Skullbriar, by the way. Skullbriar. Okay, but now we have a clean sheet here. Back to the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. 5 mana, 6/5, trample, haste. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that's settled at this turn. So what we can also do is include a bunch of stuff that cares about dying. So far, we have cards that do further our game plan, as in they ramp or they care about stuff becoming tapped. What we have not yet included in our deck is stuff that cares about dying. So let's go for whenever creature dies, or just die, whenever this creature dies. Or is put into a graveyard, but that is so specific that it could also be from the library. Classic is Bastion of Remembrance. 3 mana, it comes with 2 1/1s that can both crew the Gitrog. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Ideally, we'd find something that makes huge stuff. We don't want 1/1s to saddle our Gitrog, because they only draw 1 and then you only get to put 1 land from your hand onto the battlefield. We want huge stuff. Black Market is always good. It's a perfect inclusion, but what I'm looking for is a creature that cares about dying. So let's say Body Laundra. When it dies, return target non-rogue creature card with equal or lesser power from the graveyard to the battlefield. Could be cool. I'm gonna include it for now. Maybe we find something better. Whenever this or another creature you control with mana value 4 or greater dies, create 2 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens. Meh. Not what I'm looking for. Let's add type creature. There's lots of good payoffs for creatures dying, but we are looking specifically for creatures that care about dying. which is slightly different. You could play stuff like Archfiend of Dross. 4 mana 6/6. It enters with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter from Archfiend of Dross. Then, if it has no oil counters on it, you lose the game. But whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, the player loses 2 life. In our deck, we would play this possibly the turn after we played the Gitrog, and immediately sacrifice it as a 6-power creature to draw 6 and then put 6 cards into the graveyard. And that could certainly be something that like immediately puts you in an excellent position to win a game. It is a bit risky, I will admit, because if the Gitrog doesn't connect, you don't get to sacrifice, but you have a bunch of turns. Let's see. So when this dies, you get to put a creature. Sorry, whenever this or another artifact creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may untap target artifact. That's not that great. If it could untap our Gitrog, it would be interesting. Enduring Tenacity could be good. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. But more importantly, when it dies, if it was a creature, you had to return it to the battlefield under your control as an enchantment, not a creature. So, excuse me. That is a way to get a 2-for-1. Very easily. I don't want to spend an infinite amount of time on this. Because we're already at 25 minutes. So we're already a little over, but I do have less commanders to talk about today. So it might not matter as much. And ultimately, like, we want a good video, right? There's probably too many to find them immediately. So what I'm instead gonna do is go to EDHREC. And then we'll have a look at the Gitrog. Because I have a clear idea of what I want, but it is a little difficult to find. So those are the situations where I really will like to look up at EDHREC, because while it stifles my creativity a little if I see like, oh, these are the best cards, you should definitely play them. If I already have an idea and I'm just looking for some examples, that's perfectly fine. For example, yeah, Damogoth Woe Eater. 4 mana 7/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, you need to sacrifice a creature, and when you sacrifice this guy, each opponent discards a card, you draw a card, and then you gain 2 life. That is kind of perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. Not sure if this is already in here. Damogoth. Probably not. Wait. So, Morgoth. Probably not too many creatures that are called like that. Okay. I think then we have some pretty broad, the Gitrog, some pretty broad cards to put the Gitrog monster in a good position. Our game plan will be, turn 1, you play one of these. All of these cards ramp you on turn 1, so turn 2, you can play stuff like Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, or Dryad of the Elysian Grove, or Circle of Dreams Druid. That means on turn 3, you theoretically have 5 mana to play the Gitrog, Ravenous Ride. Immediately you crew it. If you still have a creature to crew it, you could also just swing with a 6/5 Trample Haste Commander. But really the game begins the turn after, where you can play stuff like King Makar, that cares about becoming untapped. You could play stuff like Archfiend of the Dross. That is just a huge creature for a low cost. You could play something like Body Launderer that cares about dying, or similarly, Damogoth Woeater. And then you attack, you sacrifice, and draw a bunch of cards and put a bunch of lands into play. What I really like about this also is, let's say you just get one hit in. You sacrifice your Archfiend of Dross. You draw 6 and put, let's say, 3 lands onto the battlefield immediately. That means you are perfectly set up to, even if the Gitrog gets removed, just cast it again the next turn. The fact that this provides the mana that it will later demand off of you is pretty sick. And I really like the idea. But let's move on with a bit of overtime to... Wait. We're done here. The Myco Tyrant. Myco Tyrant is a 3-mana star Elder Fungus. It tramples, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control that are either fungi or saprolings. And at the beginning of your end step, you create X 1/1 black fungus creature tokens with this creature can't block, where X is the number of times you descended this turn. And you descend each time a permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere. The first card I'm thinking of is Mesmeric Orb, which I am surprised is not in this list already. Mesmeric Orb is a 2-mana artifact that is apparently Italian. Let's choose a version that is actually readable. How about this? Let's go for the OG Meriden one. Mesmeric Orb is a 2-mana artifact. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. That means as soon as you play Mesmeric Orb and untap the following turn, you will start milling and milling and milling and milling. There is other cards that do this. Of the Brood, for example. Right, I hope I have the right one. Says whenever another permanent you control enters, each opponent mills a card. Well, okay, actually this one not quite as good because you care about descending yourself. Mesmeric Orb really though is the perfect card to go in a TMT deck. The Myco Tyrant. Let's add the tag hashtag TMT, not Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We're not quite there yet. So we're looking for a bunch of stuff that mills ourselves. I know there's a bunch of 1-mana artifacts that do this. Very important to note, I would play little to no non-permanent cards in our deck. No instants, no sorcery, if you can avoid it. Let's first do a different check though and look for actual fungi or saprolings. So fungus, saproling. It's not the best creature type. And let's say this is either a fungus or a saproling. So we can actually find some stuff here. Not the best creature type. It has seen a little bit of, support in some sets. I might also not be familiar with the game these creatures have. 3-mana, 3/3, descend 4. I guess +2/+2. No, this is pretty bad for Commander. I like this guy. Brackish Trudge, a 3-mana 4/2. It enters tapped. And for 2 mana, you get to return target card from your graveyard to your hand, but you can only activate this if you gained life this turn. The reason why I like this is like a repeatable form of descend. You mill this over, and then in a following turn, you could like gain life somehow. There's millions of ways. gain life, pay the cost, and then discard it at a later point in the game. I really like this. We'll also have to talk about Dredge later, of course. Canker Bloom we also talked about. Kind of perfect. Let's remember that one. Let's add a second one so I can visually see that I wanted to put it to a second commander. A lot of this is very mid. I think you're not actually going to focus about the creature type or on the creature type, but instead, yeah, play good fungi like Insidious Fungus. 1 mana, 1/2 for 2 mana. You sacrifice this to destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or draw a card, and then even put a land into play if you can. Stuff like this. Coincidentally, a fungus. Your commander cares about fungi, but it's also a very flexible and good card. Molder Hulk. I believe I played this in Standard. 9 mana, 7 generic. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, you also get to return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you mill this, it's a descend trigger. If you have this in your hand, you probably descended enough to play this for 2 mana and get a land with it for free. That's pretty cool. That's pretty good. Most of this seems to be pretty garbage. I know this is a good commander, but it's very Sprawling focused. 3 mana, 1/1 trample. When a Sprawling you control deals damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Sprawling creature tokens. Unfortunately, our commander, the Myco Tyrant, is an Elder Fungus, not a Sprawling, so this is not a worth inclusion. We also make fungi, unfortunately, not Sprawlings, right? We make black fungi tokens. So something like Slimefoot that cares about Sprawlings dying, also not the best. You could play something like Spore Crown Thalid. It's not the best card. Most of the games you're just gonna mill it anyways, but that's fine enough. I think that's enough representation for this approach to Commander, like looking at all the fungi and Sprawlings. Yeah, and I mean that's all of them anyways. So let's get back, and then let's talk about a different aspect. The self-mill aspect is for sure the strongest aspect, which is why in a second we're gonna talk about dredge cards. First, let's add all of these to the Myco Tyrant. Molder Hulk and Spore Crown Thalid. Next, let's find some dredge cards. Dredge. Wait. We don't actually look for cards that are called dredge. We want cards that do dredge. Classic, this is a land that you can just play, Darkmoor Salvage. The way dredge works, in case you don't know, dredge always has a number attached to it. In the case of Darkmoor Salvage, dredge 2. If you would draw a card, and that can be the card you draw every turn, or a card you draw because a card says draw a card. If you do draw a card, instead you may mill 2 cards. If you do, return the card that has dredge 2 from your graveyard to your hand. The most egregious example, of course, is the infamous Golgari Grave Troll that got banned, unbanned, and then banned again. It's a 5 mana 0/0. We don't care about the actual text of the card. This is here to get discarded into your graveyard because it has dredge 6. So instead of drawing the card for turn, you can return Golgari Grave Troll from your graveyard to your hand and mill 6 cards. For some decks, the graveyard is just an extension of their hand. And I believe to a certain extent, we're in that world here. I think dredge definitely goes into the Myco Tyrant decks. So, yeah, Stinkweed Imp. Golgari Grave Troll gets a different mention. Stinkweed Imp goes in this deck. And then, yeah, we can also put Darkmoor Salvage in there. The Micro Tyrant. That means we're milling a bunch. There is more cards that care about milling and more like keywords, effects that care about self-mill. So a card that for sure goes in this deck, as it goes in like almost every deck, is Sir Conrad. Yes, it's a boring card. Yes, it probably gets put into more decks than it should go in. But an effect like this is simply too good if you're self-milling. 5 mana, 5/4, whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. Additionally, it can mill you, which means it can descend. It can enable descent for the Micro Tyrant, which is pretty good. I'm also thinking of course, Dread Return. Dread Return, kind of a staple. I'm glad it's so cheap. It's a sorcery. For 4 mana, you get to return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. But it has flashback. Flashback meaning you can cast it from your graveyard for its flashback cost. Fortunately for us, the flashback costs of Dread Return are just sacrificing 3 creatures. What does our commander do? Yes, it creates a bunch of 1/1 black fungus creature tokens. That means, in your usual Micro Tyrant game, you will at some point either draw or mill Dread Return. You can then discard it, or, well, if you milled it, it's already in your graveyard. Sacrifice just 3 measly fungus tokens to get like the best card in your graveyard back. That could be a Sir Conrad, that could be a Molder Hulk. I think it's just a very, very good tool to have. We could also mention some previous commanders, like Savra, Queen of the Golgari. 4 mana 2/2. When you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life. If you do, each other player sacrifices a creature. Could be interesting. Since there is no immediate connection to sacrificing for the Micro Tyrant, I don't think I would put it in the video, but of course, a card that we also need to mention is Altar of the Wretched? No, I'm thinking of Altar of the Brew. No, wait. We just talked about this. I'm thinking of one of the altars. Dementia. Sacrifice a creature is the activated cost. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Of Dementia. Yeah, this card also kind of a staple, I would say. If you either have a very large Micro Tyrant, or if you want to enable your Micro Tyrant, you just have a creature lying around. It could just be a 1/1, you know, because it replaces itself, but it does make your graveyard bigger, which could mean more dredging, for example. Yeah, I think Altar of Dementia and Mesmeric Orbs are kind of like your 2-drop artifact all-stars in a deck like this. Do we have more to say about this? So it has Trample, which is nice, but it's not something to build around. Power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control that are fungi or subprolings. What you could do, I don't think it's necessary because you already get so many off of the Micro Tyrant's own ability, is turn all the creatures into fungi or subprolings. Fungus. There's token doublers that you could for sure play. I think that's very obvious, but let's still mention it. Is it Second Life? Is that what it's called? No, Second... No, Parallel Lives is what I'm thinking of. Parallel... Oh god, one of the worst words to write. Oh god. Parallelize. Guys, this is pretty... Come on. Lives? I'm gonna just type in lives and scroll down to P. Wait, I'm crazy. The card exists, right? But probably... Oh god, this is so embarrassing. Advanced... Create token... Oh god. Does it say twice? Does it say copy? I know exactly how the card looks, which makes it even worse. And I was so certain it was called Parallel Lives. I'm gonna Google it on my second screen where I can't embarrass myself. It is called Parallel Lives. What the hell? Moxfield, don't betray me. You're making this more awkward than it is supposed to be. Let's go back. Let's see if this is just a Scryfall issue. What's to not load? The card I'm thinking of is a 4-mana enchantment. If an effect would put one or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, put twice that many tokens onto the battlefield instead. I think if your commander is such a powerful enabler that can create 3, 4, 5 tokens at the same time, then Parallel Lives is for sure a worthy inclusion. It's also permanent, which means it can descend. So like if you mill it, it counts towards your descent count. Damn, Moxfield is like really dying on me. And then I believe we kind of have everything we need for a Microtyrant deck. It's not the most diverse. Like, it doesn't open the most build paths, I would say. In the meantime, I mean, while Moxfield is loading, let's not wait too long. Scryfall. Ah, it's done. Well, that was quick. You just need to threaten it. Sometimes it's like saying you're going to surrender if you don't draw a land. You're always going to draw the land. Let's move on. Valentine, Dean of the Vein, a 1-drop commander. It's a 1-mana 1/1 vampire warlock menace lifelink. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. So immediately we have some graveyard hate, and like you hate on mostly black and white aristocrat decks, which is like, you know, it's gonna happen sometimes. If you do exile a creature an opponent controls that dies, you can then pay 2. If you do, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. This effect is not very powerful. I personally don't like commanders that are super dependent on what your opponents are doing. A, there might not be people who play creatures. B, there might not be people who have a lot of creatures die. Some people just play a go white strategy, but others have your commander and not a single other creature. So this line of text is not super reliable. What we do have is a 1-mana 1/1 menace lifelink. That's not good enough to play around, but thankfully Valentine is a double-faced card. On the backside, it is a 4-mana 4/4. A human druid that reads, whenever you gain life, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain trample until end of turn. And that, my friends, is much more powerful. What I like here is the flexibility and the idea of having 2 different game plans that can work hand in hand. Of course, I believe Lisette, Dean of the Root, is gonna be well, your main game plan. You're gonna play this 90% of the time. But other times, you're gonna bust out Valentine because your opponents are playing aristocrat strategies, sacrificing a bunch of creatures, and you're like, nah, you are not doing that. How would I approach deck building for a commander like this? I would focus, of course, on this side, and then maybe put certain linking cards in the deck that make it so you can play Valentine or Lisette. What I read whenever you gain life, of course, I'm thinking of many life triggers. Now, this does not care about how much life you gain per chunk. Like, it does not care about you gaining one big chunk of life. There's a lot of cards that do that. This cares about many triggers, and then you can pay one each time you get one of those triggers. So let's look for, of course, the cheapest way to gain life, which should be 1-drop creatures. I'm thinking of, I believe, Essence Warden. We're gonna find out in a second. Let's add the type creature because our commander gives all of our creatures +1/+1, of course. That means, yeah. You don't want to have 1-mana cards that just gain life for the sake of gaining life. You want those creatures to get pumped up. Let's see what we find. Yes, I was thinking of Essence Warden. Whenever another creature comes into play, you gain 1 life. That means even during your opponent's turn, you can gain life. You can make your creatures bigger, which could potentially threaten some. It's almost like a combat trick, right? You threaten to make your creatures bigger at instant speed, potentially. So it's harder to attack you. We see a lot of dice triggers here. That's not exactly what we're looking for. Something like Haywire Might is great. It's one of those cards that is flexible. So you can kind of put it in the deck as this flexible card, but it also gains life, which is nice. Here we have Landfall, gain a life. Stuff like that could be something to include in the deck. Night Market Lookout. When it becomes tapped, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. That's great. That's a good aggressive 1-drop. All in all, this strategy looks pretty aggressive. Getting +1/+1 and trample to a wide board is kind of the most aggressive thing to do. Unfortunately, I haven't seen too much repeatable stuff. There is Juddy Offshoot and the Essence Warden. Ideally, we'd be looking at maybe 5 to 6 of these cards. Here we have a new card from Loban Eclipsed, a 1-mana, 1/1 Death Touch. Whenever another creature you control enters, you gain 1 life. That's kind of perfect for our strategy, because pre-combat you're going to play a bunch of creatures, gain a bunch of life, pay a bunch of mana, and turn that into an overrun type effect. So let's have these as our representatives of very cheap mana. And then I know there's a card, Weather the Storm. And of course, I'm also thinking of the Ether Flux Reservoir, which we are going to go over as a reservoir, which I'm going to go over in a second. Scrolling down, let's add all of these cards that we've talked about already and give them the Valentine tag. Although realistically speaking, we're not actually building a Valentine deck. But that's the way it goes with these double-faced cards sometimes. Juddy Offshoot, Virulent, Emissary. Surprisingly expensive for an uncommon, but I think the price will go down in the more close future. So we have these 1-drops that care about creatures, and of course, Lisette cares about having a bunch of creatures. And then the 2 non-creatures I added, we're going to go over right now. Weather the Storm is a 2-mana instant. You gain 3 life. That's not very impressive, and I said I wouldn't play cards that gain life just for the sake of gaining life. But what makes this special is it has Storm. So when you cast a spell, you get to copy it for each spell you cast before it. Sorry, not you cast, but for each spell that was cast before it this turn. Since this is instant speed, you could play this during an opponent's turn who was popping off playing a bunch of spells and gain 3 life for every spell they and maybe other people cast. And of course, if you have Lisette out, that means for each spell that was cast this turn, you also get to pay an additional 1. And if you do, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and those creatures gain trample until end of turn. And then Aetherflux Reservoir, most people probably know as a combo payoff 4 mana. Whenever you cast a spell, gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. That means 1 for the first, 2 for the second, and so on and so forth. And that means every spell you play, also a creature spell, triggers this ability. Means Lisette triggers, you get to pay 1 as an addition to every creature, let's say you play, to pump up your other creatures, even if you don't have something like Essence Warden or Virulent Emissary. I believe this kind of deck also needs a bunch of 1-drops that tap for mana. I know there's an elf that taps for black, and I'm going to use that as a representative in the video, because we've talked about a bunch of other 1-drops that also would be included. I think you'd be playing the Llanowar elves and Fentorn elves of this world. Maybe even a Dionis, Elfish Archdruid. Let's actually add all of these immediately. And there's a specific reason why I think this lends itself quite nicely. It might be a bit lame for some, but I think this Lisette deck lends itself to the elf strategy of playing just a bunch of elves on one, Fentorn elves, Llanowar elves, and all the other elves that tap for mana, because you will be needing a bunch of mana. In the late game, even if you top deck a 1-drop, it is very easy to imagine a world where you have, let's say, an Essence Warden and a Virulent Emissary and an Aetherflux Reservoir. It doesn't need to be all 3 of those, but just as an example. And then you play a 1-drop, but additionally, you gain life from 3 different sources. And that means you can spend 3 extra mana on those measly 1 mana spells, and suddenly you have a mana sink. And if you have a mana sink, you want to have a lot of mana, and the best way to produce a lot of mana in green is elves. Elves, coincidentally, just cheap creatures, right? And if we look at like Virulent Emissary is an elf, unfortunately, Essence Warden also an elf. At a certain point, of course, you could be asking yourself the question, like, why am I not playing an elf commander then? But, I mean, it's still valid to go to put the elf package in a different deck, in my opinion. What else comes to mind for this side of the card? +1/+1 counters means we can proliferate. Is there an interesting proliferate card that we can talk about? I've mentioned a bunch of cards throughout the video, aka during the last live streams, but maybe we find a card that works particularly well because it also gains life. We'll see. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying that if that permanent's mana value was 3 or less proliferate. We could talk about this as an example. And then let the viewer figure out the rest, I believe. This is perfect because, yeah, like it gains life to trigger your commander, and it also proliferates. It's very, very good. And I believe, giving it a quick scroll down, that's the only card I would mention. It's not the only good proliferate card. I believe you're going to play a bunch of proliferate cards, but it's one that fits so perfectly into this idea of Lisette that, yeah, I think it's the one I would choose to represent the idea. What else? We have an elf package to power up A, like to have a bunch of creatures that we can then pump and give trample to, and B, to have a bunch of mana to sink into this ability. I was thinking of cards that care about base power. There is a bunch of cards, but most of them, at least I can think of, are white and green that care about your creatures having more power than base power. But we will see if that's the case for black and green as well. 52 results, we can go through all of these. Interesting cards, by the way. Like, sometimes it's just cool to find new cards. Belt of Giant Strength, 2 mana, equipped creature has base power and toughness 10/10. Equip 10, but it costs X less to activate, where X is the power of the creature it targets. It's not perfect, but I could see a world where you have these creatures that are pumped up with +1/+1 counters. So it's cheap to equip the Belt of Giant Strength. But their actual base power is super low, so the Belt of Giant Strength still does something. It's easy to imagine an elf that is a 1/1 base power creature, but is a 14/14. Like, stuff like that happens regularly in elf decks. And then it would cost 0 to equip the Belt of Giant Strength. And it would still give the full +10/+10. But it's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for cards that do not enhance base power and toughness, but instead say, like, if you have creatures that have more power and toughness than their base power, do this and that. We'll see if that's something that exists in the archetype. We see a bunch of 10/10, 8/8. It becomes a 7/7. This is a pretty cool card, by the way. 8 mana, 1/1 for 1 mana. Target creature you control becomes a 7/7 on end of turn. It's pretty fun, but again, not what we're looking for. We're getting more and more good removal spells. 2 mana, 0/4. Creatures a tree folk with base power and toughness 0/4. I believe this was reprinted in Lorwyn. I'm not sure though. I mean, stuff like this is still playable. 6 mana, creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to the other types. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. You're gonna be playing very cheap 1-drops. Don't get me wrong. It's still good to enhance the base power. It's just not what I want to highlight in the video, if possible. Where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, that's mostly good for decks that power up a bunch of stuff. Sorry, just one single creature. It might not be something that this color combination cares about in particular. So I think I'm not gonna mention it in the video. Well, sometimes you explore an idea and find out there's nothing there. So be it. Is that everything we can talk about with Lisette? Because then I would move on to Valentine. Whatever you gain life. I believe so. Let's try and find a link between a 4 mana 4/4 that cares about gaining a bunch of life and going white to a 1 mana 1/1 that is mostly a hate piece and then a pretty mediocre token maker. I mean, you could talk about pests again. I think it seems like I have a slight bias towards Strixhaven. I think this is the 4th commander where we talk about pests. So let's give it a quick look and see if we find the perfect pest card that combines both the front and the back side. I don't want to talk about all the same cards all the time. Beledros is just very strong, and it's a mana sink, and it creates a bunch of 1/1s. I think Beledros should get a mention. Also very nice if you can make like callbacks to previous commanders. It just, yeah, gives the video a feeling of cohesion. Might be the only one, honestly, I want to mention. Pest Infestation is very, very good just in general. I think I'm gonna give it a mention because people should be playing more of this card, in my opinion. Yep, let's leave it at Pest Infestation and Beledros. So, Beledros, you're going in our Valentine deck. I mean, while this doesn't specifically enhance the Valentine side of the card, it was Valentine who gave the pointer of putting pests in your deck, which means a bunch of creatures entering and gaining you life on your side of the battlefield, and they also gain you life when they die. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. We're already at, oh my goodness, we're at an hour. This is the third commander. Oh no. Anyways, that means we should move on to Valrose the Scar Striped. For this commander specifically, we're gonna do something different because I already have kind of a pre-built deck. I was so excited about this and a certain new card from Low and Eclipsed that, yeah, I couldn't help it but build a deck around it. So let's go to that deck. Let's try and find our Scavenge deck. First of all, what does Varolz do? It's a 3-mana 2/2 Troll Warrior, and each creature card in your graveyard has Scavenge. The Scavenge cost is equal to its mana cost, and that does include colored mana. What does Scavenge actually do? Well, you exile a creature card from your graveyard and pay its mana cost. Then you put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that card's power on target creature. Scavenge only as a sorcery. Additionally, Varolz can protect itself because you can sacrifice another creature to regenerate Varolz the Scar Striped. The card that triggered my interest in this commander is Moonshadow. Moonshadow is a 1-mana 7/7 menace, but of course, Wizards would never print a 1-mana 7/7 that is actually a 1-mana 7/7. That's why this creature enters with 6 -1/-1 counters on it. And whenever one or more permanent cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, while this creature has a -1/-1 counter on it, you get to remove a -1/-1 counter from this creature. The idea is you play this turn 1, and it's a 1/1 menace. That is perfectly fine. And then, as the game goes on and more permanent cards are put into your graveyard, it eventually turns into this 1-mana 7/7 menace, which is very good. But do you know where this creature is immediately a 1-mana 7/7? In your graveyard. And that's why, if Varolz is on the battlefield, you can pay 1 black mana to give anything, could be your commander, could be a different creature, +7/+7 for just 1 black mana. Of course, Moonshadow is a callback to an even more egregious card in this deck called Death Shadow, which is a 1-mana 13/13, but it gets -X/-X, where X is your life total. Now in Modern, where your starting life total is 20, you could play this card on, let's say, turn 2. I believe it was possible to play on turn 1 if you had enough Street Race, but it's very unrealistic in that format already. In Commander, this is very, very difficult to achieve, like just playing a Death Shadow early on. But again, do you know where this is? A 1-mana 13/13 immediately in your graveyard. This is because it's an ability that is just active on the battlefield. Unlike star creatures, which are their power and toughness no matter where they are. These two cards are kind of the biggest outliers, combined with Phyrexian Dreadnought. a 1 mana 12/12 that has trample, and when it comes into play, you need to sacrifice any number of creatures with total power of 12 or more, or sacrifice Phyrexian Dreadnought. This is a 1 mana 12/12. In your graveyard, for just 1 generic mana, you can give a creature +12/+12. These 3 cards are the backbone. They're the most, like efficient, powered cards. So we're all gonna add them to the deck. Add to another deck, the most interesting series, Golgari. And let's talk about some payoffs for having a bunch of a bunch of counters for cheap. Well, first of all, you, of course, as so often, need some enablers for self-mill like Stitches Supplier, kind of the most efficient one. 1 mana, mill 6 cards, eventually. Stuff like that is good, but not super exciting. Altar of Dementia, we've talked about. You sacrifice a creature, target player puts number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. The idea is you put the 7 counters from Moonshadow on just any creature, you sacrifice that creature, and eventually mill over Death Shadow and Phyrexian Dreadnought to give something +25/+25 for just 2 mana, right? That's the basic idea. So we're also gonna add Altar of Dementia to the deck. Specifically, add Altar of Dementia. We're gonna add the tag of Valros. Of Varels. Well, this card already has 3 tags, so seems like this Altar of Dementia card is pretty good. There's more cards that are higher power in the graveyard than on the battlefield. We got a bunch of them in Lore when Eclipsed because -1/-1 counters is such a prevalent theme. Bristlebane Battler, but all of them are much worse. 2 mana 6/6 is not the same as a 1 mana 13/13. Let's face it. We can also talk about the Hunted Horror cycle. Some cards are just overstated completely because their ETB is so bad. 2 mana 7/7, but an opponent gets 2/3/3 green center creature tokens that have protection from black. Of course, this creature is kind of unplayable as a creature, but as a 2 mana, give a creature 7+1/+1 counters. It's pretty good. I want to talk about some different pieces though. First of all, XX cards. Now, or Star. The Star cards are special as in their power and toughness gets updated all throughout the game. This does not need to be on the battlefield to have a power and toughness. In Old Stick Fingers case, its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. No matter where Old Stick Fingers is, you have to count the number of creature cards in your graveyard to determine its power. That means the fuller your graveyard, the stronger Old Stick Fingers is. Its mana cost, even though there's an X here, is always 2. So for 2 mana, you get any number of +1/+1 counters, each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Pretty good. The most egregious example I'm going to mention, though, is, of course, our favorite 5-drops when it comes to big power, Lord of Extinction. Gorgeous artwork, by the way. Lord of Extinction is a 5-mana creature whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in all graveyards, including the one of your 3 opponents. I know 5 mana is a lot, but if for 5 mana you get +40/+40 encounters, that's pretty good. So let's add it to the deck. A very important part of a Varel's deck, in my opinion, is cards that tap for mana equal to their power. Heronblade Elite is one such example. It's a 3 mana 1/1 Vigilance. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then tap, add mana add mana of any one color where X is Heronblade Elite's power. That means you get this out, and it already taps for 1 mana, which is great. But then you exile a Moon Shadow from your graveyard to give this +7/+7, and suddenly your 3-drop taps for 8 mana. And that is quite obscene, because for 8 mana, I mean, you can do a bunch of stuff. Let's add... Oops, I just added it to considering, I believe. Let's talk about a different example. Yeah, Viridian Joiner kind of does the same. It just adds green instead of mana of any color. There's also Kami of Whispered Hopes, 3 mana. Add X of anyone where X is this creature's power. Additionally, if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, put that many counters +1 on that permanent instead. This one, I'm going to talk about this one because it cares about +1/+1 counters specifically, which is nice to have. It's not going to make a huge difference if you're getting 13 for 1 mana anyways. But yeah, it's very nice. And then there's a bunch of creatures that, again, are just bad. Their abilities are so bad that their stats can be obscene. We have a 3 mana 8/8, a 3 mana 7/6. All of these are very good. Because I like talking about new cards, I'd also mention Terra Symbiosis, a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, draw that many cards. In a lot of decks, this is not quite as good because you put +1/+1 counters on creatures incrementally, just 1 at a time. So this can only draw 1 card per turn. With a Varol's deck, this can easily be 3 mana to exile a Phyrexian Soulgorger and put 8 counters on something, and then you draw 8 cards. This card, I think, rarely gets better than in a Varol's deck. We can also talk about cards that care about high power on the battlefield. Example, Traverse the Outlands. 5 mana sorcery, search a library for up to X basic lands, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Quite easily, you can get this up to 10 or whatever, even more, to get all the basic lands out of your deck. Make sure A, you have infinite mana, and B, you don't draw basic lands later on in the game. And I think that is kind of the base idea I want to convey about Varol's. Is, yeah, like cheap enablers, stuff that makes mana equal to their power, and then pay off for having big creatures. I'm gonna find one more card because Traverse the Outlands, I think, gets a mention in the video already. So it could be something like, there was a repeatable effect, I believe, somewhere in here. If not, we can just take Life's Legacy, sacrifice a creature as additional cost, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power. But I believe there was a 4-drop that I remember. Yeah, it was great to good. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, then discard 3 cards. So usually this is balanced around the fact that you can only sacrifice big creatures, but all of our creatures can be big. And then the downside of having to discard 3 cards is actually an upside, because you get to discard those high power, low mana value creatures to then turn another creature into a huge creature, sacrifice it, draw cards again. I think this is the perfect card to mention in a Varol's deck. All right, let's add all of these to Varol's. We need to scroll down so much now. So, well, actually, where are they? I hope I added them to the right deck. Maybe all of them already got a mention. Pest Infestation, I think we mentioned in our Valentine deck. Let's update this real quick to see if the cards are here or if I had a happy little accident. No, they're here. Okay, untapped creatures, yes. So, to reiterate, we have the cheap enablers. for Varels, who scavenges Death Shadow away for 1 black mana out of your graveyard to give a creature +13/+13. Similarly, Phyrexian Dreadnought gives +12/+12 for just 1 generic mana. I think Moonshadow is probably in here somewhere. So we're also going to add it real quick. If you want to go big or go home, Lord of Extinction is your creature to exile because it's a star, where star is the card count of every graveyard combined. Very good. Kami of Whispered Hopes stands as a representative for a type of creature that usually costs 3 mana. There is some that cost 4. That taps and adds X mana where X is its power, which of course is easily enabled by our commander. And then, well, we are still looking for Greater Good, which might already be in here, and that's why it doesn't show up. And that's exactly what happens. Greater Good, very good. Let's see. I'm not sure if Golgari Grave Troll is in the Valentine's deck. Just in case, I'm going to add the tag again. That was quick, but that's of course because I already had a deck built around. Altar of Dementia stands as a representative of Self-Mill. Of course, this is kind of the best card because it cares about big creatures also. And these cards really embody the spirit of a Varels deck. When I first started building Varels, it was very much a Voltron deck. The idea was to get this up to 21 as quickly as possible, and then beat someone down. And that's for sure possible. But I think this is a much more diverse commander than it first looks. You don't need to do this. You don't need to build this as Voltron. Yes, it can protect itself. But the fact that it sacrifices another creature can also mean getting rid of a bad creature. Let's say you have Moonshadow in hand. You play it. Later, you can then sacrifice it. And in your graveyard, it might be much more useful than on the battlefield. Let's move on. Because next in line is a really old card from Time Shifted. I assume it might have had a previous printing. Vati Ildal is a 4-mana 3/3 human warrior, and it taps to give target creature power and toughness 1 until end of turn. The first idea I have, and that comes to mind, I believe, to anyone, is -1/-1 counters. Where a creature can be as strong and powerful as it wants. Vati can make it so a simple -1/-1 counter kills it. This is a bit tricky to search for, I'll admit. But we can start with cards like Necroskitter, who just got a reprint. So it's gonna get cheaper, don't worry. I don't think it will stay at $8. Apparently it was already in the deck. Necroskitter. Where are you hiding, you little many-legged creature? Yes, so thankfully we already have a bunch of -1/-1 counter payoffs here. So we can just copy those over. Necroskitter, 3-mana 1/4. It has Wither, so it deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. And whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you get to return a card to the battlefield under your control. Very good. VHA should be the tag. VHA. Let's see what else there is. Whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard from play, if it had a -1/-1 counter on it, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Perfect. Just, keeping those those -1/-1 counters around. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. I'm not gonna mention this card. It might still be very good, but the idea of our commander is not to just randomly distribute -1/-1 counters, but instead to specifically target one creature with a -1/-1 counter so it immediately dies. Massacre Girl, on the other hand, is kind of perfect. 4 mana, 4/4. Menace creatures you control with Wither. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, draw a card. So you'll have these creatures that have a -1/-1 counter, and then suddenly your commander turns them into a 1 toughness creature that still has a -1/-1 counter on it. Consequently, its toughness was less than 1. Massacre Girl with trigger. Perfect. Let's look for other words that act like this. So let's look for toughness less than. We might also look for power less than. Okay, but here we have a good removal spell that I have lying around a bunch, and I always want to play it, but I never really play graveyard-focused strategies. Ghastly Demise is a 1 mana instant. Destroy target non-black creature if its toughness is less than or equal to the number of cards in your graveyard. Usually there's a bit of a risk attached. You don't know how well your self-milling plan is going to be. You don't know how big the opposing creature is. But if it's a 1/1, well, you probably can kill it. Let's look for power less than 1. These people care about other creatures' power being less than theirs, which is interesting. I don't think it's what we want to be doing here. Okay. We're looking for something that specifically cares about one creature having low power or toughness. Well, Vidalcan Shackles is very funny that it shows up here because it's completely unplayable. 3 mana. You may choose not to untap this during your untap step. And for 2 and tap, gain control of target creature with power less than or equal the number of islands you control for as long as this remains tapped. Unfortunately, it's going to be pretty difficult to have an island in your black-green commander deck. But yeah, there is ways to make it work. And then you only need 1 because Vati does turn your opposing creatures into 1 power creatures. Since I'm running out of base ideas, again, this is the moment where I consult EDH Rec. If I'm just missing that kickoff. Ah, yes, I actually thought of cards like this. Of course, Knights of Soul's Betrayal. It's also already in here. Knights of Soul's Betrayal is a 4 mana enchantment that just gives all creatures -1/-1. It's very simple. Thankfully, your commander is a 3/3, so it does not die. It just makes it so every time you tap your commander, something probably dies. Of course, if there's a bunch of +1/+1 counters on that creature, that's not going to be the case anymore, but for sure that's a card that should end up in your deck. Maybe Kurvik as well. It kind of doubles as the same effect. Other creatures get -1/-1. Here we have Screams from Within. 3 mana aura. Creature gets -1/-1, and whenever the creature is put into your graveyard, return this from your graveyard to play. That's very interesting because you don't need to pay the mana again. I'm gonna mention that card because it looks awesome. I have it in my bulk pile, but I never get to play it. Screams from Within. Is there something better? I mean, Pestilence is interesting. It deals 1 damage to each creature and each player for just 1 black mana. But it's not what I'm looking for. It doesn't have that, like, wow effect. Ooh. That is indeed a very funny combo that I would not have thought of. So thank you, EDH Trick. Tree of Perdition. 4 mana, 0/13. It's a defender. And you can tap it to exchange target opponent's life total with this creature's toughness. I mean, if those 2 cards weren't made for one another, of Perdition. I'm not sure if it's in here already. Of Perdition. Of course, the basic idea is you turn this into a 1/1 creature and then tap this to give someone 1 life instead of what they would usually get, aka 13 life. That is very good. And I know there's more cards that turn something into either an 0/2 or maybe even a 1/1. I know mostly about 0/2 stuff, but that's very interesting. I think that's already enough to showcase in a video. So we have a very fun combo, a niche card that people probably don't know about. VHA. Right? We have some repeats in Blowfly Infestation, Knights of Soul Betrayal, Massacre Girl, yes, Necroskita, yes. But then we have Ghastly Demise as a very efficient 1-mana removal spells. A very interesting card in Screams from Within that doesn't really see much play anywhere else. A fun combo in Tree of Perdition. Which one looks better? I kind of like this version better. Is this the Law when Eclipse one, the new one? Yeah. And personally, I don't have too much else to say about this commander. Let's look for power becomes, or maybe toughness becomes. Because I know there's a bunch more cards, and maybe those deserve a mention as well. Here we have the power boosting ones. That's interesting. But of course, I'm thinking of cards like... It doesn't show up. It's called a witch. Toughness and then type. It should be a witch. Maybe witch doesn't exist anymore. Maybe this is a discontinued creature type. So how else would I identify it? It turns stuff into an 0/2. So this is... Maybe it's because it doesn't... No, here she is. Sorceress Queen. Target creature becomes an 0/2 until end of turn. It does keep its abilities. Which sometimes in Commander means this doesn't do much. But, you know, it doubles in a way the ability your commander has. Of course, 1 is much better than 2 because just 1/1/1 counter does the job. But I still want to mention her. Also because the artwork is pretty sick. And yes, I think that's good enough now. With the sorceress also. So let's add her to the commander and move on to the next one. Vraska. There's many Vraskas we could have chosen. I chose Vraska the Silencer, a 3-mana 3/3 death touch. Of course, she is a Gorgon assassin. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you may pay 1. If you do, return that card to the battlefield tapped under your control. It's a treasure. So it functions like a treasure. You can tap it and sacrifice it to add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other card types. What it does not lose is ETBs. So thankfully, Commander is kind of littered with static abilities and ETBs. And this creature is so cool because it encourages you to play removal, which I encourage as well as a player. I think Commander players should play more removal on average. But then you get to steal their cool stuff and turn it into your little treasure cabinet. I think that's such a cool and unique take on the whole Medusa thing Raska has going on. So how would we make this sound interesting to the viewer? What ideas can we give them? It has a death touch. So you could play fight spells, but not the actual fight spells, but instead stuff that makes it so you deal damage equal to your power. Stuff like ram through. Deal damage equal power. We can just take one of the first ones. Aggressive Instinct. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. We can look for a better one. Sometimes it makes sense to just showcase an actual good one. And some of them are in the deck already. Or in the list. Let's not call it a deck. But we might just take the first one. Nothing like immediately jumps at me, but we can just take ramp through. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. If the creature you control has trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. That might just be dead text in your Vraska deck. You might manage to give it trample. You never know, because in a Vraska deck, every game is going to be different depending on what your opponents play, which is very interesting. We could look for something that specifically cares about treasures. Or artifact enters the battlefield. Let's look for artifact enters the battlefield. Artifact enters the battlefield. What I maybe should do is have 2 tabs open of the same list, and then have one be the search and one be the list, so I don't constantly have to move up and down. Might be interesting. Artifact enters the battlefield. Something that I can identify as good. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard, no. We want whenever. Yeah, actually, let's add whenever. Not that many. Oh my goodness. Whenever this enters the battlefield, no. Whenever this or another creature enters the battlefield, no. Whenever any creature comes into play, if there are 2 or more creatures in play, no. Okay, so maybe there's nothing here in these colors. It's not because of the S in enters, right? Sometimes words are just templated in a different way than you would expect. So yeah, I might not have found what I want here. There's these commanders that are so open are difficult to make enticing, because all you can say is like, yeah, every game's gonna be different. You play a bunch of removal. Let's look at treasure. I hope it's not going to be too many examples. If there's too many examples, give it a quick scroll down and then refer to EDA trick, I would say. Treasure. It's probably like 200 cards, my expectation. Only 120. Let's see. Token doublers? Wait, is it a token? No, it's not a token, I don't believe. Lands you control are treasures, or can create treasures. That's interesting, of course. It's unfortunate that it's not a token. Let me go back. I have it on my second screen. I can see the stream, but it's very difficult to read the top left commander. I hope it's better for the viewers. A non-token creature dies. Return that card. Yeah, so you don't create an actual treasure token. That is that creature. Sacrifice a treasure to make this become an artifact. Interesting that it's a sacrifice outlet for a treasure, and this is going to be a treasure, but of course, like, what's the benefit here, right? This is just you getting treasures as an upside, which is okay. At the beginning of each end step, if you cast both a creature spell and a non-creature spell, create a clue token, a food token, and a treasure token. Now imagine that with Academy Manufacturer. Nothing here comes to, like, makes a good case for it itself. A lot of this is either do this and get a treasure token, or do this, and if you sacrifice a treasure token, you get more. Whenever a player casts a spell they don't own, that player creates a treasure token. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller looks at the top card of that opponent's library and exiles it face down. So a bit of stealing going on here from Gonti, who was always a very sketchy person. This is not, I think for this one, I will have to, yeah, like, Raska the Silencer. Let's take a look at what other smarter people did. Okay, Cheville is here. Bane of Monsters, a 2-drop that puts counters on stuff, and then that stuff, when it dies, draws you a card and gains you life. That's interesting. Shieldred's Edict. Yeah, we can talk about cards like that are just mass sacrifice. Shieldred's Edict. So it's a 2-mana card that makes every opponent sacrifice a card. That means for 2 mana, you potentially get 3 creatures, which is absolutely bonkers. It's crazy, crazy value. I mean, it has Death Touch, so you could include the staff. Oh yeah, that's a combo we talk about a lot. I feel like there's a staff that makes it so you can tap your creature to deal 2 damage to something, and whenever a creature dies or is put into a graveyard, you untap the equipped creature. Although, is this a replacement effect? No, the creature does die, which is good, of course. Interesting. Revel in Riches. 5 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a treasure token. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. That's funny because the creature does die, so you get the treasure token, but it also comes back as a treasure. So, kind of perfect. I think I want to mention it. There's not much else. Let's go here. Revel in Riches. That is going to take up screen time during this segment. Is a $10 alternate win con. A lot of people find these types of alternate win con kind of boring. But realistically, when are you ever going to play this? You don't face this all that often, so why not? Vraska joins up. When it enters, put a death touch counter on each creature you control. Whenever a legendary creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That seems like not that great. Yeah, whenever another non-token creature dies, you draw a card. Harvester of Souls. Let's put it in here. It deserves a mention. Harvester of Souls as a type of card that should definitely appear in a Vraska deck, and that is you benefit off of drawing cards. Let's put Morbid Opportunist. Like, let's put it at its side. Opportunist. I think I said a few too many letters in that word. And then, yeah, it's just Removal City, I guess. I could see you play this in a Vraska Tribal as the head. I don't have much more interesting stuff to say. So let's move these two creatures to the right tag and then move on. Reaching the 2-hour mark. Halfway done, by the way. Okay. Willow Dusk, Essence Seer, is a 3-mana, 3/3 Dryad Druid. From the looks of it, I would have definitely said this is a goblin, but apparently not. For 1 and tap, you choose another target creature. Then you put a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of life you gained this turn, or the amount of life you lost this turn, whichever is greater. Activate only as a sorcery. This is one of those cards earlier when we talked about life gain. I mentioned that some cards care about a bunch of small life gain triggers, and some cards care about a bunch of life or gaining a bunch of life at the same time. This very much so cares about gaining a bunch of life all in one turn. There is a hidden, not so hidden mode to this, though. It also cares about you losing a bunch of life. And losing life in black is the easiest thing in the world. We are going to move to another one of my pre-built decks that cares about exactly this. We are in a Mardu shell here that cares about losing a bunch of life and then gaining a bunch of life, which would be the ideal combination. But unfortunately, gaining a bunch of life is very white-coded, so might not be possible. We can talk about the Endstone, though. The Endstone is a 7-mana artifact. Whenever you play a land or cast a spell, draw a card. At the beginning of your end step, your life total becomes half your starting life total. Actually, thinking about this, this is not as good. So half your starting life total is 20 HP in Commander, right? That means at maximum you gain 19 life, which is a lot. The problem is you do so at your end step. The commander specifically, I'm sorry, I'm pouring a bunch of tea in my cup. The commander here specifically cares or says you can only use its ability Sorcery Speed, which kind of disqualifies this from working together. It's an interesting card as in it gains a bunch of life. I could mention it exactly this way in the video. You gain a bunch of life, but it's probably not for this commander, but it's certainly an interesting card. There is much more perfect stuff here, though. There is kind of fair stuff like Crick, Son of Yawgmoth, aka Post Malone, which is a 7 mana card that you can play for 4 if you pay 6 life. And it makes it so each black mana pip in your mana cost can be instead paid with 2 life rather than mana. And whenever you cast a black spell, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And why I think this card is especially good for this deck is it has a lifelink. If we are losing a bunch of life, we should make sure we're also gaining a bunch of life. And lifelink is the easiest way to do so in this deck. A bunch of people come with lifelink on it, especially in black, also in green a little bit. And this guy makes it so A, you can mana cheat. B, you're losing a bunch of life. And C, you're gaining a bunch of life back if it stays alive. So that's pretty cool. There's more cards that make you lose a bunch of life. Necropotence, if you're into that kind of stuff. For 3 mana, you skip your draw step. It's an enchantment. Whenever you discard a card, exile it instead. And for 1 life, you get to exile the top card of your library, and at the end step, put it into your hand. It's just very good. It's a bunch of card draw that loses you a bunch of life. Why not play it? We're gonna talk about it in the video for sure. Necrologica. Actually, it's an interesting card. We're gonna talk about it real quick. 5 mana instant. It can only be played during your discard phase. Pay X life, draw X cards. Same reason as the Endstone that disqualifies it from this deck is our ability, unfortunately, is instant speed. Sorry, sorcery speed only. But there's more things that we can talk about here. Hatred. Let's talk about hatred for a bit. Wow. So toxic. 5 mana instant, pay X life, target creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. You know you're safe. Everybody's kind of tapped out. You play Hatred to give a creature +X/+0, and then you tap your commander to give it +1/+1 for every life you paid for Hatred. Easy peasy, you can give a creature +40/+20 here. I think this is like the card I think of when I'm thinking losing a bunch of life. Shocks and Fetches, I think, also deserve a mention. Let's choose... Let's actually choose the on-color Shocks and Fetches, which are not in this deck, of course. Instant Speed. Sorry. Phyrexian Purge, also very good. Unfortunately, it's red. Is there stuff that we can play that is just black? Maybe not. But we have some good groundwork done here. So we probably need to refresh here. So we have the will tag here. Yawgmoth, Riches. Yes, so to reiterate, we have a good lifelink creature, which is the easiest way to get life back that you lost previously with Willow Dusk's ability. Necropotence has a strong card advantage engine that loses you a bunch of life. Oh, actually, Revel in Riches is Raska, not... Whoops. Willow Dusk doesn't care about reveling in riches. She's a druid after all. I think we also want to be able to untap this creature. There's a bunch of ways to do it. Let's find the best one. Or maybe not the best one, but the most perfect fit, if you will. Untap creature. While this loads, I'm gonna pour myself a bit more tea. Green has stuff like Instill Energy, which comes to the top of my head immediately. How many cards do we have here? Just so I know. Okay, that's a little too many. We're just gonna take Instill Energy to have, again, a representative of the idea of untapping your commander in this deck. Instill Energy, very interesting. We're gonna read the updated rules text because, you know, the wording has just become a lot better over the years. It's an aura, enchant creature, can attack as though it had haste. That means, very importantly, it can only attack. You can't play this the same turn you play your commander and tap it. But for 0 mana, you can untap enchanted creature. Do this only during your turn and only once each turn. The fact that we can only do this during our turn, we don't care about because the commander says sorcery speed only anyways, right? And then, yeah, only once each turn. I mean, that's a bummer, but the card needs to be balanced, so whatever. Yeah, this card is perfect, of course, for our commander. +1/+1 counters on creatures. We can also maybe talk about the guy that we talked about previously, that is Kami of Whispered Hopes, that adds mana equal to its power. You could maybe combo off with this. I'm not sure. I think it's worth a mention. Although you don't get counters, so this is more of a one-shot instead of like continuously growing your Kami. Oh wait, never mind. Of course, it puts counters on it, so yeah, we're doing great. Kami of the Whispered Hopes should definitely be inclusion. Just the same way as stuff like Greater Good, yes, but also, damn it got lost somewhere here. Where did we first talk about +1/+1 counters? I'm thinking of the 3 mana enchantment. Whenever +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, draw that many cards, but only do this once each turn. It's from Aetherdrift, so hammering it down that this is a very good card. It might not be important because it was included in the precon, I believe. So, you know, people might already know about it, but I'm gonna decide that on the spot when I'm recording the video, because yeah, sometimes you can just feel that it would be weird to mention a card again. For now, I want to put it on my radar. We can also talk about Loading Zone again. 4 mana enchantment, same set. Edges of Eternity. I think I said Ether Drift, but I meant Edges of Eternity. If one of more counters would be put in a creature, twice as many counters are put on it instead. Yeah, let's talk about that. It's just an insane card. And then Terra Symbiosis is the card that I meant. 3 mana. Also, such a cool artwork, by the way. It looks a bit like a propaganda poster, but, you know, just magic things. And then we have a good package here, right? We could talk about the life gain approach as well. Gain life equal to power is something I'm gonna type in real quick, because the way I imagine this is actually not that good, because you want to, the creatures are going to be big after you activate your commander's ability, and then if you play the spell, unless you also have Instill Energy, it's not going to do that much. So not the greatest synergy. I think it's fine to just talk about the life loss because it's more interesting in my opinion. There's a bunch of life gain stuff out there already. So yeah, I think that's enough of a package for me. And that means it's also enough for me to move on to Winter, Cynical Opportunist, a 4 mana 2/5 human warlock. Like every good black-green creature, it has Death Touch, and whenever it attacks, you mill 3 cards. Additionally, it has Delirium. At the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more permanent card types, 4 or more card types among them. If you do, put a number of permanent cards from among them. Jesus Christ. So this in the video is where I would say pineapple to have an audio cue that I messed up very badly when recording. Sorry, delirium. So if you have 4 or more different card types in your graveyard, then this ability triggers. And what does it do? At the beginning of your end step, exile any number of cards from among your graveyard with 4 or more permanent card types among them. If you do, put a permanent card from among those cards that you just exiled onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. That means we're back to counting permanent card types. We already had one of those commanders in Babali Saga, the Night Witch. So, of course, we are, what's she called? Winter. Wait, did I move this here? Yeah, so let's move on to Winter. Winter should have the tag #win, which is just the best tag. And we talked about how this caring is shared with, this caring about creature types is shared with the Goyfs. Barrow Goyf is a good example, as it has power and toughness +1 equal to the card types among card types in all graveyards, but yours, of course, is the one that you can control. Nether Goyf, same thing, but you can exile it from your graveyard. Sorry, you can escape it from your graveyard, which is very nice. We're also going to talk about stuff like Mycosynth Lattice that turns all cards on the battlefield into artifacts, and all cards that aren't on the battlefield into colorless stuff. Actually, it works way better for Babali Saga. As a reminder, Babali Saga is a 3-mana 3/3 that taps and sacrifices 3 permanents. If there were 3 or more card types among sacrificed permanents, each opponent loses 3 life, you gain 3 life, and you draw 3 cards. Mycosynth Lattice works well with Babali Saga because it turns all permanents into artifacts. But it only turns cards that aren't on the battlefield into colorless cards. So Mycosynth Lattice actually not that good. Let's look at Ashaya, which does something very similar that also doesn't work here. Non-token creatures you control are forests, in addition to their other types. Also very good with Babali Saga, which the more I look at her, the more I like her design. It also works with Babali Saga because it affects the things on your battlefield and Babali Saga sacrifices. But, sorry, we need to move back to Winter. Winter cares about stuff in your graveyard having different types. Altar of the Goyfs, though, is good because it is a tribal artifact, or as it would now be called, a kindred artifact. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +X/+X, where X is the number of card types among cards in all graveyards. It's not that good on the battlefield, but in the graveyard, it is a tribal artifact. Then you can play a bunch of Delirium cards. Drag to the Roots is very nice. Traverse the Ulvenwald, also very nice. For 1 mana, you can search your library for a basic land card and reveal it and put it in your hand. But if you have Delirium, it's just a 1 mana tutor for a creature or a land, which of course is like very, very good in every format ever. Do we have something new to talk about here? In addition to the other types, is something that we could look for. In addition to their other types. Maybe even something that affects graveyards. Thankfully, there's not that many cards here. A lot of them affect creatures that you reanimate, right? So this turns everything into zombies that you reanimate. Not that interesting to us. Lands you control and land cards you own that aren't in the battlefield are deserts. This is unfortunately a subtype, not a super type. And I am pretty sure that Winter, who we are going to take a look at again and read the rules text maybe, only cares about super types. So let's view details. Finality counter, finality counter, finality counter. Okay, it only explains finality counters, but I'm pretty sure desert is a subtype. The way to differentiate is like, are they on the left side or on the right side for the most part? Although legendary doesn't count, unfortunately. And I believe desert is on the right side of this dash. Artifacts you control are foods, but nothing here affects cards in your graveyard, right? This is a reanimate. Creatures you control are slivers in addition to their other types. Also affects just creatures. By the way, if you were wondering, cards in your library and graveyard are not creatures. They are just that, creature cards, which is super confusing to newer players, but it's very important for the way Magic functions. Lands you control. Yeah, all of this is just... it just cares about stuff that's on the battlefield, which makes sense, to be quite honest. Yeah. So, is there an Urza Saga in here? Urza Saga. Urza's Saga. Urza Saga I'm going to give a mention because, as you will see, it's a land, so not very high opportunity costs. That is also an enchantment. So there you have a land enchantment that goes through graveyard immediately. Then you have a tribal artifact. Here we can talk about enchantment creatures that sacrifice themselves. Let's go to the Babalu Saga tag. Do we have anything good here? We talked about Delirium here and other payoffs for having a bunch of card types in your graveyard. But honestly, not that many enchantment creature cards. So, enchantment. Jesus Christ. Enchantment creature. Let's look for those. Just, a good example. Because there's good cards that go into this deck that, that are interesting. If you do put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield. Okay. Whenever you cast a spell, this doesn't quite work. Let's see if we can find just a generically good Arasta, for example. But let's talk about a different one, maybe. Arvinox the Mind Flail isn't a creature unless you control 3 or more permanents you don't own. At the beginning of your end step, exile the bottom card of each opponent's library face down. For as long as those cards remain exiled, you may look at them, you may cast permanent spells from among them, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. Why not? Not the best card. I personally wouldn't play it, probably. But it's a big creature that you can reanimate. It's an enchantment creature, which is very nice. So it's kind of, it serves duty in a lot of different ways here, right? It's a big thing you want to reanimate, but it also has a bunch of creature types. Once during each of your turns, you may cast an enchantment spell by paying life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. Also great if we're running a bunch of big enchantment creatures. Why not play this card to round out the composition? We can talk about this some more. But I think that's good enough. And then let's look at a bunch of the more common type artifact creatures. choose maybe a good one here. I'm wondering, do you think there's an artifact creature enchantment? Creature enchantment. There seems to not be that type of card. There's instant sorcery cards, though, that we should mention. There's split card, so we're gonna look for is split in a second. We're gonna reanimate something, so we can maybe sort by mana value, direction, descending. That way we'll get the most expensive cards first, right? Artifact creature, Darksteel Colossus. What a treat to reanimate. Maybe we have something with an ETB. That would be nice. If you cast, well, why wizards? Why do you put safety valves like if you cast it onto a creature? That's so lame, honestly. So lame. Whenever the first non-creature spell each turn is played, counter that spell. That is disgusting. I love it and I want to showcase this card. What the hell? First non-creature spell each turn is countered? For you, might be bad because you will be playing instants and sorceries as well. But honestly, I mean, that's pretty cool. Because for you, if your instant sorcery gets countered, you get to put them into the graveyard. Let's look at is split. So this seems to, yeah, this has all the split cards. These are so bad to showcase, by the way. I really dislike them. This is just an enchantment. But here we have, this is sorcery. Room. I sound like a car. Here we have an instant sorcery. Destined to lead. 2 mana instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Meh. Aftermath. So once this is in your graveyard, all creatures able to block target creatures this turn do so. Also kind of meh. But it serves a double function, as in it's an instant and a sorcery. Life to death, unfortunately, sorcery. But we're here to talk about the concept of split cards. Let's go back top and add those to our commander. And see how it looks from a first glance. So we're talking about winter. With good reanimation targets, with the different types, we can talk about split cards here. What else is there to mention? If you do put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it. We can talk about remove counter, right? There's probably stuff that does it repeatedly. The only thing that comes to my mind does it once. Remove counter. With Law and Eclipse, we might have gotten a lot of stuff for that strategy. 5 mana, a bit too expensive. We're looking at like, we want 1 to 3 mana artifacts that do this thing repeatedly. No. Remove counter, and let's also say permanent. Permanent. It could be a creature, but permanent works better, most likely. Remove any number of counters from among permanents onto the battlefield. Yeah, it's okay. Glissa. So we're gonna add Glissa. Glissa, you absolute Sunslayer. You're gonna end up in our winter deck for sure. Hex Parasite, perfect. didn't get a mention. It's such a cool card. For X and a Phyrexian Black, remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, it gets +1/+0 each turn. We don't care about this second line of text. You just get to remove counters. Right. Easy peasy. This is such a good inclusion. You need to be careful that it doesn't care about charge counters or +1/+1 counters specifically, but instead finality counters. Hex Parasite. Power Conduit. Remove a counter from a permanent you control. Let's go. Also such a good card. Power Conduit. Such a good card. I hope Marshfield then doesn't jumble up between the two versions that I'm using right now. Probably not. Marshfield is a relatively good website. And there's the Hex Parasite. And I think then we have a bunch of approaches. This Death Touch on this creature is kind of meaningless. Go away, go away. When it attacks, mill 3 cards is nice. Self-mill will get a mention, but it's not super necessary, I think. Or sorry, it's not super necessary to mention it again and again and again in the video. And then the Delirium should be easy to turn on. We can talk about artifact lands, maybe enchantment lands. Artifact lands. Why not? Card type, artifact, and land. Mossword Bridge? No, that's a different one. Dark Moss Bridge. Okay. Dark Moss Bridge. Oh, we had another one. We had Rentmaw here. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I guess I'll just refer also to the Rentmaw creaking nest portion of the video in the final product. Does that mean we have enough and we can move on to the final commander on this list? Before we move on, I really want to say, like, I appreciate getting to do these live. I mean, today was more of a solo podcast, but it gives me a space and a time to work on these videos. And really, like, this stuff, if I were to do it completely on my own without any side project like streaming attached to it, I mean, I have a much harder time getting excited about it. So even if no one is actively chatting, I still appreciate that I get to do this. And then it's just about editing, and I mean, the editing doesn't take that long. I think me having 3 2-hour streaming sessions, and that is after I've done some research offline for the first couple commanders, really shows that it takes a while. I mean, I don't go super in depth. I don't build the entire decks. And still, I need to do like 6 to 8 hours, depending on how much previous work I've done on these commanders per video. And cramming that, and I repeat, like, if I were to do this alone, it's rather boring. Cramming that quote-unquote boring prep work into a work week where you, after work, just want to relax. It's not that easy. So, yeah, I think I'm going to do this going forward quite a bit more often. We might even start with the next cycle or color combination, although it might be weird for people to watch research on the next video while the black-green one is not out, which I am hoping to get out this week. Again, editing takes less time than research in my experience so far. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the big bad evil guy from the cutest set that Magic has maybe ever seen. Let's talk about Ygra, Eater of All. Ygra is a 5-mana elemental cat. it has ward sacrifice of food, which sounds almost impossible to pay until you consider that each other creature is food in addition to its other types. That means they are a food artifact, to quote the text itself. So every creature besides Igra who eats all is food to Igra, of course. That also means, your opponents can pay to sacrifice this permanent and gain 3 life. It just acts like a food token would. And also, whenever a food is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put 2+1/+1 counters on Igra, Eater of all. It eats all the cute mice and rabbits and gets stronger doing so. That's just the cycle of life on on Bloomburrow, I guess. This commander is crazy. It's my favorite kind of commander. It's a bit difficult to tackle, though. The effect that it has on the battlefield is so game warping that you can do some crazy stuff here. We can first look at stuff that maybe taxes artifacts. Artifact untap. Maybe there's cards that say, like, artifacts don't untap. Let's see. There's something that taxes other people's artifacts. First of all, there's Clock of Omens. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. You can go crazy that route. Of course, like if every creature is an artifact, remember, Igra eats all. That means it can also eat your own creatures. AKA, it turns your creatures into food as well. Other creatures, not opponents' creatures. That means Clock of Omens, there's probably easy ways to combo off here. You just need something that creates a bunch of creatures. Whenever this or another artifact creature is put into your graveyard, untap target artifact. There is a combo here, I swear to God. I'm not going to explore it in a deep way, but people will find it easily if they think Igra is exciting. There's the grinding station stuff, sacrifice an artifact target. Player puts 3 cards from his or her library into his or her graveyard. They could have, yeah, I think nowadays the text is a bit smoother. And whenever an artifact comes into play, untap grinding station. Players can't untap more than 1 artifact during their untap steps. I'm gonna talk about this card as a concept again. Taxing artifacts in play is something you can do. This has severe consequences for your deck building as well. Because, again, your other creatures are artifacts. It is a route you can go down, though. For sure. If you don't play many creatures, there you go. You can play Emi Sechu and have a stacks deck. Kill switch. Tap all other artifacts. They don't untap during their controller's untap step, for as long as this remains tapped. Interesting. So, okay. Kill switch. It says only the artifacts that had tried to tap when the ability resolved are prevented from untapping. Artifacts that enter after that or permanents that become artifacts are not affected. Note that you can't choose to leave this card tapped during your untap step. Yeah, okay. It's a bit convoluted. I don't fully understand it because if this untaps simultaneously with your cards, with your artifacts, what happens? I'm gonna leave this out, but cards like this might end up in the deck. Yeah, we have like a manifold key, untap another target artifact. It's just so versatile to turn creatures into artifacts. Again, like salvaging station, stuff like that. Pretty easy to combo off with. But we do need to remember that, again, this affects only creatures on the battlefield. But untap target artifact creature. Again, like, but we have enough, we found enough examples of combo approaches, like artifact combo approaches, for sure. That means we can add all of these, but we do need to find a different way to approach this. And some of it is quite obvious to me. This doesn't care about non-token creatures, so you can make a bunch of tokens and then sacrifice all those tokens to give +2/+2 for each of them to Igra. Right? So how would we do this? Is there a bunch of ways to loop food? There's the cat combo for sure. Other creatures you control are food artifacts. The best way to make creature tokens in green. It's probably not pests. We've talked about pests so much also. Elves, probably, but elves are also pretty boring. Sacrifice of food. Oof, at the end of the stream, I have to admit I'm a bit tired, so let's get some inspiration here. Yeah, the food combo. Squirrels. Yeah, squirrels for sure. Rats. Interesting. Whenever you sacrifice a food, create a rat. Experimental confectioner. Perfect. Experimental confectioner. Perfect card. I'm not sure I would have found it on my own. Although I would have done a general food check. Knights of Sweet Revenge. Actually, yeah, let's do that first. Because we had some general food cards here. Knight of Sweet Revenge is perfect. Stuff like Jaheira does not apply because those cards are not tokens. They're just food, right? They're not food tokens. But let's see if there's something else here. Whenever you sacrifice one or more foods, create a squirrel. And a squirrel consequently becomes a food. We're gonna talk about Cauldron Familia and the Witch's Oven. Get here. By the way, did I ever Underworld Cookbook? Okay, I need to find a fiend. There's probably a million fiends. I'm sure it's called Fiend. It might not. Okay, sorry. Quick side tangent. There is a 2-mana combo that kind of is like Cookbook and Cat. As in, you repeatedly tap your 1-mana artifact, and there is a creature that pairs perfectly with it. So we're looking for a creature. The creature costs 4 mana. It is mono black, and a return hand artifact. I need to find it real quick. I'm sorry, this is driving me crazy. It's Oval Chase Daredevil. 4 mana. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you get to return this from your graveyard to your hand. I needed to get that one out of the system. It was missing from one of these commanders. So yeah. Knight of Sweet's Revenge. What else do we have here? We create a bunch of sacrifice a food. Look at cards, some card advantage. Very good. But is there something better here? Sacrifice a food, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Sacrifice a food, draw a card, lose 1 life. Stuff like that. Very good, very flexible. Gilded Goose becomes pretty dark. Once you can sacrifice a creature, the Gilded Goose just feeds off of fellow hunted creatures. Fellow game, fellow livestock. Similarly to Feasting Troll King, all of it gets a very different vibe once you don't just sacrifice foods but food creatures. So that's cool from a like flavor perspective. Is that enough? Is that enough for a video? A video segment. A lot of these double up. We're gonna say it's interesting that you can turn stuff into artifacts. On one hand, you can go the stacks route. If playing stuff that makes it so your opponents can only untap 1 creature each untap step. There's also the combo aspect of playing cards like Manifold Key or Voltaic Key to untap target artifact, Voltaic Construct to untap target artifact creature, because suddenly every creature is an artifact creature. So if you have something that taps for 3 mana, suddenly you have infinite mana. If you have Voltaic Key, a 3 mana producer, and your commander. So that's an easy way to combo off. Clock of Omens, very similarly. Joss Scorpion, very similarly. You can go a different route of more fair food production and having a bunch of stuff die. You can have token producers like Camellia the Seed Miser. Whenever you sacrifice one of her foods, create a 1/1 squirrel. That squirrel, consequently, is a food. So you could sacrifice that creature and thus have sacrificed a food. There's a Cauldron Familia and Witch's Oven combo, which sacrifices a bunch of food, aka the smaller cat, the house cat. It creates more food to put +1/+1 counters here. There's stuff like Gilded Goose. Whoops, sorry. There's stuff like Gilded Goose that sacrifices food for other benefits to kind of like one-shot guys. Let's go back to the page, see if people are doing some other interesting stuff. This is just a bunch of food stuff. The Savvy Hunter, I can see, like, mentioning again. Savvy Hunter. Oh, wow. I don't actually have it in the deck yet. But it's perfect. Because it's also... The Confectioner, of course. Kind of in a similar manner than Camellia. When that enters, you create a food. Whenever you sacrifice a food, you create a 1/1, which is a food as long as you have your commander. And this one I don't yet know where it goes, but we'll see. What else are people doing? Yeah, exactly. This is the card this is the stuff that I'm looking for. Viridian Revel. Whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. Perfect. I love how much the Viridians hate artifacts. Wait, Viridian Revel was the card, right? Yeah. Stuff like this is perfect. Artifacts your opponents enter the battlefield artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and when it comes into the battlefield, destroy target artifact. Manglehorn. Manglehorn. We're gonna add you to the deck, add you here, and then I'm gonna do one more thing. Let's type in Manglehorn real quick. Find the card and then go to the Scryfall tag, which is something I haven't done today. But here you have a collection of tags that users assigned to Manglehorn. And we're gonna look at the tag Hate Artifact. Hate Artifact has a lot of tags, which is good for us. Null Rod. Activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. Let's add it to the deck. Why not? Null Rod. This one has much less of a deck building restriction. If your creatures don't have activated abilities, which, I mean, they probably will have, but it is something that you can build around for sure. We of course need to exclude like all of these cards that aren't in our color combination, but I'm sure we'll find our way through this quick enough. A player who controls more permanents than any others. Okay. No, that's not interesting. That's just a very generic stacks card. Stuff like this doesn't work Golem's Heart. Whenever a player casts an artifact spell, you gain 1 life. On the stack, these creatures won't be artifacts, but in play, they will. At the beginning of your end step, if an artifact or creature was put into a graveyard, meh, not that great. What the hell is this? Man, Magic, what is it called? Alchemy is doing some weird stuff. Why is this the Jaheira that we put into our deck? Same art, but it's like 6 different versions. What the hell? Yeah, of course, I was thinking of stuff like Kataki, but it's in white. All artifacts have sacrificed this unless you pay 1. That's not quite what we can do here in black and green. Unfortunately, Kibu also red, so not something we do. Whenever another artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, 2 damage to that artifact's controller. I don't think this will end up in your deck. You will have too many artifacts. Tap target artifact or creature. Meh, not that great. Tap target artifact. Enchanted artifact has lose 2 life at the beginning of upkeep. It's not a good card in general. And last but not least, for each artifact or creature in target opponent's graveyard, again, like in the graveyard, these are not artifacts. As long as this is untapped, each player chooses artifact, creature, or land during his or her untap step. That player can untap only permanents of the chosen type. So either creatures, which means they can untap 1 creature, or artifacts, which means they can only untap 1 creature. That's interesting. Maybe I skipped over too many green cards. I think I'm too too tired to pay good attention. Titania Song. Each non-creature artifact. Well, it's creature artifacts. I mean, this is a pretty good card. Okay. Word of Bone's also interesting. Each opponent who controls more creatures than you can't play creature cards. Same is true for artifacts, enchantments, and lands. That's a very interesting card. Maybe a bit too stacksy for my liking. Well, does that bring us to the end of this stream? 2.5 hours for 9 cards, which is a third. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that it takes like 7 hours of research, at least up to 10 per video, which is why sometimes you have to wait so long for new videos. I'm pretty happy with this selection. It's gonna be a lot of commanders to talk about. I don't quite know. The sideboard, I think, is not up to date. I think there's Bex missing in the sideboard. No Blexes in there, so it might be 35 commanders. I feel like my videos are getting longer and longer. We'll see. We'll see. Also, like, if I misspeak horribly or during the recording, I realize actually this is not that interesting, or actually I've talked about this a bunch already for different commanders. Some commanders do end up getting cut even after I've done the research. For now, I think I'm gonna head out and think about either tomorrow's stream, if I'm gonna do a stream tomorrow, or about like moving on to the editing process or recording process. I'm not gonna record today. My voice is already very gone. But instead of editing all these streams into one video, I'm gonna do a dedicated recording session. This is way too rambly to efficiently turn into a video anyways. And also I think it's just better quality to have it in a video. Okay. I think that does it. So I haven't done the video outros yet, but why not do it for the stream as well? Always remember, be kind to yourself and others.